Hello, hello. Welcome to this third session from the Ringo Learning Festival here about resource flows, addressing the beating heart of the system. We want to talk about what can funders do differently to shift more power and resources to local actors. But before we go into that, we again want to invite you to a little warm up. So if you can, please switch on your camera if your bandwidth allows it, so that we can see as many people as possible. And actually, exactly, take me out of the spotlight for that. So see cameras going on. I love that. That's wonderful. It's just great to see people from all over the world calling in. So if if you have already got more on your plate at the moment than you know what to do with, please show it with your face. Who has more on their plate than they know what to do with? Yes, thank you. And if you have experienced this year the power of working together in collaboration with diverse other people and organizations, the power of coming together, if you have experienced this year already, show it with your face. Show us, gift us with your brightest smile. I want to see smiles. Yes. Oh, Debbie, you're smiling from here to here. I love that. Wonderful. A more serious question. If your organization's resources have been directly impacted by the shutdown of USAID, please show it with your arms so that you can see a little bit kind of who is directly impacted. Look at that. Many arms going up. We know it's all over the sector at the moment. And our solidarity and empathy is with all of you. I've got another question. Show us with your hand your level of confidence in the system to use this moment to reshape how this system and its organizations are resourced. Is it low? Is it medium? Or is it high? Can I show your confidence in the system that to use this moment in a way to, okay, let's see, many high hands, some middle hands, some lower hands, but many middle and higher hands in terms of the confidence. I love that. And last thing, if you need 3 deep breaths to arrive fully here, some of you have been on 2 other sessions already. Just let's take 3 deep breaths, and then wonderful Jenny Richmond is going to take over. Arrive fully. Thank you so much for being here with us. Jenny, there you go.
Hello, everybody. How wonderful to be in this gathering, in this community. Lovely to see you all here. And how interesting to be coming together at this particular time. So thanks, David, for leading us in that sort of thought process of just getting ourselves ready for this session. So some of you will have been in earlier sessions on the Ringo Learning community. So we've had the kickoff session, and then we've just had a session focused on governance and leadership. So some of us are really warmed up, and some of you will be coming fresh into this call. So we're going to try and give you a little bit of context as we go, but not repeat too much. We are gathered here to think about resourcing the civil society system. And we are thinking of it, as David said, as the resourcing being sort of the beating heart of that system. And we'll explain a little bit more what we mean by that in a moment. But just, so my name's Jenny. I'm part of the Ringo core team. I've been working in this space for the last 3 or 4 years, however long we've been going. And I also work as an independent consultant from Oxford in the UK. And yeah, I have been sort of gathering some of the insights from the whole Ringo process that this journey we've been on. I've been sort of just scooping up some of our insights, some of our little crystals of reflection and learning that we've gained from the process that we've been through. So I'm going to share a few of those with you today. But I just wanted to sort of acknowledge how we're coming into this conversation today. So we're coming in after Ringo Project, which is this amazing community of people around the world, a community of people that is connected with other communities and is explicitly connected with other initiatives and other communities. It's a group of people and ideas that is really trying to take a systems change lens to looking at the question of what civil society should look like in the future, what the INGO in particular, so the international dimension of civil society could be. We've really tried to reimagine that. So some of you have been on that journey together. Systems change lens, of course, is taking a real connected look. It's looking at incentives, it's looking at blockers, it's looking at unintended consequences of different parts of the system. So just sort of bear that in mind as we go through the conversation. And we're coming into a conversation on resourcing at a time when the resourcing of civil society and development cooperation in general has just sort of had an explosion go off in the middle of it because of the stop work order, USAID, the biggest development agency in the world. So we are in a moment of utter sort of transformation, chaos, and shock, really. So I guess I just want to acknowledge that and express solidarity with those who are in all different shapes and forms feeling the pain of that shock, of that explosion. It's very real, and it takes lots of different forms depending on where you're sitting. So it's very sharp and it's happening right now. So I just want to sort of put that on the table, and we will reflect on that. But I want to encourage us to have this conversation today, sort of acknowledging that pain, acknowledging the immediate crisis, but also thinking about the imperative for new thinking, the imperative for looking sort of systemically at what we want to see change. This is a conversation many of us on this call have been having for years and years and years, even preceding the work we've been doing in Ringo and others have been doing in other spaces. But we're in this moment of massive disruption, and we know from COVID that actually change happens when huge disruption happens. So let's just sort of bear that in mind as well. So on this session, we have an hour together. Then we're going to have an extra sort of flex half an hour where we can carry on conversations in a more flexible, informal space. We do have translation, so please find your interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, and there'll be instructions in the chat. So please feel free to get interpretation if you need it. So we're also going to be joined by Jessie and Nana, who I'll introduce to you in a minute. But for now, I just want to sort of share with you some of the nuggets, as I say, that have come out of the Ringo experience. So Ringo has been on this journey. We started off with a fantastic piece of research, which was led by Waxy, Nana's team, the West Africa Civil Society Institute. They did this fantastic survey with over 600 civil society organizations in the Global South, and I'm sure someone will share a link to it in the chat. That was the foundation of Ringo, and in that research, immediately funding and resourcing came up as a huge obstacle to the relationship between civil society, national and local civil society organizations, and their INGO counterparts. This area of partnership, which is often quite a transactional financial arrangement, not ideally, and obviously that's what we're exploring. But so that research was the foundation of our thinking on resourcing. We then went into what we called a social lab, so a convening of like 90 people who came together from different parts of the system, who did this sort of thinking journey together. And one of the first things that we did in that social lab was to identify areas of stuckness in the system. So we took this systems view of everything around civil society and around civil society resourcing, And funding, again, came up as this huge topic of stuckness. The way that funds were channeled, the systems, the procedures, the compliance, the relationship involved in funding and resourcing all came up as very stuck. So it felt like a really important area to look at in more depth, and we started to do that. And one of the first things that we did was to convene a group of funders who thought similarly. So a progressive group of funders who are really committed to exploring how their practice could change, and how they could contribute to a systems change perspective of resourcing. That was called our Funder Action Pod, and the Ringo Funder Action Pod sort of set up in 2021 and has been in conversation, well, until last year. So that was, I'm going to share a number of the reflections that came from that group. And then the final piece of our sort of intelligence on this question, if you like, was the prototypes that Ringo designed and experimented with. So these were areas coming out of our lab where we thought actually some more experimental work could be really helpful. So we had various prototypes, and many of you will be very familiar with them, but one of them was on risk. We had thinking on accountability. We had one on participatory grant making, and the tying of aid as well, which is a really important topic connected to this question of resourcing. So the prototypes have also brought real insight. And there is too much to share in one quick 5-minute whiz through, but I just want to touch on a few of the learnings that we've drawn out, and we've got a blog as well that we can share with you, and Nana and Jessie are going to add to that. But one key topic coming out of the resourcing question is accountability. So, so much of the way that funding and resourcing happens in our current system is propelled by a nervousness about risk, about compliance, about accountability, and really sort of a very traditional and linear sort of understanding of how you manage accountabilities and who you're accountable to. So we drew on the experience of collaborators such as the Firelight Foundation, the Pledge for Change, and the PALM, the Participatory Accountability Learning Mechanism, which again, if colleagues could share links in the chat, that would be great. These are experiments in looking at how you can actually really center community and as grassroots civil society organizations, as close to the action, as close to the work as possible. So yeah, we drew on their experience. We sort of, I guess, one key learning from those conversations and from that work is that rethinking accountabilities takes, really active thought, it takes intention, but it also takes time, it takes resources, and it takes sort of proactive education of all the stakeholders involved. So we'll go into that more in the discussion, but I just wanted to flag that question of accountability. The next area I wanted to share on is that of intermediaries. Now, this is a terrible word. It's a very sort of bureaucratic word. It's quite functional. It's quite controversial. There are other words maybe better, but basically the role of organizations or platforms or intermediaries who can facilitate funding to flow much more locally. And there are some brilliant examples of organizations that are doing that in a really exciting way, in a really sort of transformative way, using tech, using data. Epic Africa, for example, really sort of trying to nurture the civil society system in Africa with data, with analysis. ADD International has done a lot of rethinking about its role as an INGO, really trying to sort of work differently as an intermediary to facilitate that flow of funding, to carry risk, to enable flows of funds to get more local to smaller organizations, etc. So yeah, I guess a key reflection on that point is that we really called for, or sort of acknowledged the need for funders to build up that plumbing system, that ecosystem building work that facilitates the funding flows to be much more locally rooted, and to support intermediaries to do that work well from the global south. So intermediaries based in the global south to take the lead in that space. Quick word on risk. As I said before, risk is often used as a blocker, as an area of stuckness to stop giving over power, to prevent giving over power and resource. So, our prototype in Ringo, looking at sort of how brave encounters, how actually relational and really, really radically transparent conversations can actually transform an approach to risk, really sort of centering trust and understanding of different partners rather than a sort of nervousness and a controlling approach to risk. And all of this is part of, different small dimensions of a systems change approach to resourcing. So actually, another key reflection is that it's all interconnected. And as we look at different levers, different sort of incentives and blockers and propellers and relationships, we really need to think of it sort of holistically. So resourcing as that beating heart, pumping the blood around the system, if you like. If you're gonna look at that differently, then actually it has potential to be really transformational. I'm going to stop there, David, and actually turn to Nana and Jessie to ask for them to bring in their reflections. So those were a few sort of headlines from the Ringo experience, and as I explained, that's come from different parts of our journey, different parts of our sort of thinking. But we have the wonderful Nana Afazino and Jessie Eves from WAXI and from Humanity United, respectively. So Nana is a leading thinker and speaker on the questions of civil society globally. Sorry, I think somebody needs to mute. Thank you. So Nana is a global leader, a global thinker, coming from the global south, coming from Ghana, coming from West Africa, executive director of West Africa Civil Society Institute, which is our leader of Ringo. So it's really spearheading the Ringo community. So we're going to turn to you first, Nana, but let me first introduce Jessie as well, who is the director of peace initiatives within Humanity United. Is that right, Jessie? Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's right.
Peace building, yes, yeah.
Interim managing director of peace building, yeah, peace building. And Humanity does a huge amount in this space of rethinking philanthropy and really trying to sort of build a very human-centered approach to peace and transformation. So thank you both for your presence. And I'm going to put a question to you, which is sort of, what are the two most notable or significant shifts in the system that you have noticed in terms of resourcing in recent years? So Nana, we're gonna start with you. Obviously, there's a very interesting context to this question right now.
Very much.
Do with it what you will. Over to you.
So I think I would say that one of the most significant shifts could be seen after COVID, I would say. I think after COVID, particularly, even though discussions on that had started before COVID, but after COVID, you had more funders now, a few more being interested in supporting civil society with core funding, looking at issues around institution building, a few more, because that wasn't the practice at all. But you could see more interests in that, and a few more funders being able to say, okay, you can use this amount of money, to support your core needs as an organization rather than just projects. So that was one of the changes, I think, shifts that I would say happened. I think the other disruptor for me was the type of like the Mackenzie Scott funding, which was a disruptor in the system. Even though I must say that there are many organizations that, of course, did not benefit from that kind of funding, several. But the way she funded, where you actually could have funding that said, use this funding the way you think it can support your institution. We are not interested in reports and all of that. Just use it to support your organization. That was something that many of us have never, ever experienced. And it has supported a number of organizations, not many more. I know you said two, but I want to add one more, which is the move towards localization and how you had some bilateral institutions. And I'm going to speak first about, the Dutch. I think the Dutch were very, they were kind of some, you could say maybe first movers on that, to say they were going to allow organizations that were local organizations to lead in bids, working with Dutch organizations. That was something that was also a shift, which was not something that was the norm. And of course, USAID came in with the localization 25%. And there are organizations that really benefited from this and are now reeling from the effects because they invested so much. They were now the ones who were leading, these projects. Invested, some of them, their reserves, because USAID will only pay you after you have pre-financed. And their money, their reserves have gone into it, and now they are completely, reeling. And from this. So for me, these are some of the changes shifts that I would say happened, in the last few years. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nana. Yeah, we are in that space of many organizations reeling right now, as you say. But yeah, thank you so much for kicking us off. Jesse, do you want to come in with your thoughts?
Sure, and thank you again for inviting us, or inviting me here. And I'm just, when you all planned this several months ago, I did not realize we would be in the middle of complete systemic upheaval. And just totally endorse everything Nana just said. And actually, Nana, we share a dear friend and mentor in Akwazi Edu, who's a friend of ours, and he likes to say, "Before I speak, I have something to say." And I just want to note that I think today, myself and I think everyone that's speaking, we're probably going to miss or not mention so many things that people that are joining probably think should be mentioned. And I think that just names the moment that we're in. We are in this mix of chaos and pain and complexity, and it's impossible to name everything. And I think that's why now more than ever, moments like this, where we have this collective sense making about what is happening and creating kind of meaning making from that, so that we can figure out what do we do next. It's so critical to see what people are doing kind of across the world, across kind of multiple systems that are coming together here. So if you don't hear me say the glaringly obvious thing, that's not intentional. It's just indicative of the moment we're in. But I am very grateful. I would actually count this moment as a critical moment, because I think it's helping to bring together all that we've been seeing over the past couple of years. And it's actually where I see a great deal of hope. And I say that knowing that people right now, as Nana was just mentioning, are in immense pain and are suffering structural violence. And people we love and know are impacted by this and are in direct dangers. But I still hold on to hope from what we've seen already. And so that I won't mention COVID was one of my things, but Nana said it perfectly. I think what we've started to see over the past couple of years is now been manifested over the past couple of weeks, which is, in the words of Antonio Gramsci, the social theorist, "The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters." And so now I am seeing the time of monsters, and one system is dying, but there are also kind of green shoots poking through the soil, and a new system is coming in and needs to fill that vacuum. And I think right now what we've been seeing over the past couple of years is helping to cultivate the soil for those green shoots to grow. And you know, the Ringo Funder Pod often talked about how change comes from the demand side. That didn't quite happen in this case, but the demand side has already started to cultivate the soil for what emerges next. And so you already heard mention of COVID and the overwhelming shift that we saw towards those that are from the communities, those that are closest to the work, to see that localization in actors. And yet over the past couple of years, we saw INGOs and donors in particular try to claw back control. We saw expats return to countries. We saw the amount of money going directly to communities dropped, you know, or remained in the single digits. And at the same time, within the space I'm in philanthropy, we saw a tug of war between philanthropies on how and when and why they need to give up control. And over the past few years, that's really taken the form of a debate between strategic philanthropy and trust-based philanthropy. And there was this artificial binary that was created, this either or scenario. You can be strategic and practice trust-based philanthropy. But this was all about who wants control and who's willing to give up control and who's willing to walk alongside those closest to the work with a focus on deepening relationships and finding solutions together. And the bottom line of that is long-term flexible support that takes on the risk. And both Jenny and Nana were talking about that. So what we've been seeing is proof from many different donors and actors that are even on this call that you can do this differently, that you can, if you make this about the relationships between sectors, between actors, between processes and coalitions, and you create an environment where you can see this happen over the long term, it creates many more options of possibility. And like I said, the green shoots that are coming up, the new system that can emerge, the foundation is already there. And we've seen examples like Radical Flexibility Fund. We've seen examples like Fumble Talk in Sierra Leone, the Natural Resource Conflict Transformation Center in Nepal, Catalyst for Peace, who I see on this call, you know, helping to bring together actors from across the system to reassess in real time what is our role in this global system, and looking for everyone, for donors, governments, everyone, to understand that the answers are there. The problems the communities are facing, they have the answers for them. We just need to support them over the long term. So I will stop there before we look to the future.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Yeah, it really resonates that thinking about sort of just not being able to cover off all the angles right now. So I think all the more reason to come together and to scoop up our collective reflections, and we will be turning to everyone on the call in a moment to get their reflections and to add in their experience and ideas. So hopefully that will build a true picture. Thank you so much, Jesse, for those reflections. So thinking forward, I mean, obviously we're in such a moment of, as you say, sort of system transformation. The old world is dying, and we have not yet sort of fully built the new. So it's hard to answer this next question, but what are your ideas on the next 2 years? What you think the most important shifts that we need to be tackling are, you know, in such a rapidly changing world, both in terms of the context and in terms of our own sector? That's a tough call, I realize, but yeah, what are your best guesses? And as I say, then we'll turn to the wider group. Thank you. Nana.
Thank you very much. I think, one, we do have philanthropies that are still interested in going on this path. And it is important that they do not change focus and be discouraged by what is happening. And, you know, as Biraj in one of the sessions we just had was saying, what happened in India was that a lot of the, you know, support that they could have gotten from the usual philanthropies went back to support, you know, what was happening, internal things happening in the US, because there are challenges there as well. So we could actually find less of funding, supporting the work that we've been doing. So it will be important that they stay the course. And I think that is one of the key things for us. But I would also say the philanthropies cannot fill the 40 billion gap that, has been created by this disruption and upending of everything. And it is important that we find other ways of resourcing in addition to the philanthropic work. I would say, particularly speaking from the African perspective, that we need to be able to get the kind of support to raise our own resourcing to support our institutions. And that could take various forms, but the funding that comes to us must be funding that enables us to become stronger and to be able to build our own resource base in the long term, than funding that actually cripples us and doesn't build our institutions or enable us to, have sustainable gains in the long term, which is the kind of funding that we've been getting for a long time. So funding for reserves, funding for building capital assets, funding for having social enterprises, funding for being able to raise, crowdfund, build that kind of social capital and capital that comes in terms of financing from our own base, building the philanthropic infrastructure in our countries. It will be very important. And I think it's also important that we change this focus on money as the only resource that we value. Because I think it is part of this structurally racist way of looking at things, that it is where the money comes from. There are so many other resources that are valuable that other partners bring to the table. So it is important for us to look at it. I am actually concerned that if we do not take care, we are going to have people with money, philanthrocapitalism, filling in this gap. The Gates, the Elon Musks, the people like that, filling in this gap and pushing their own agendas in our different countries. And it is important that we solidarize and find ways to prevent this from happening. So thank you.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you, Nana. Yeah, solidarity was the word that was bouncing around my head as you were speaking. It's sort of, if ever we got a really, really stark reminder of what is unhelpful about dependent resourcing relationships, it's right now, right? So building alternatives, building solidaristic options and locally rooted options it just feels never more important as now. Thank you, Nana. Jesse, over to you.
Yeah, so I as we witness the death of one system, and USAID I think is a great, sadly, or an example of this right now, where, as Nana was saying, like, things are never going to be the same. And in particular, we can never trust the US government or even other large donors that make these kind of big promises. Again, it's going to be very hard. So that's why, we talk about the importance of, okay, what is the new thing that is emerging? We're also seeing at the same time shrinking funding from governments across the board. And so for me, it just shows that the system that existed 2 weeks ago will never exist again, even if USAID comes back in some form. And so, yeah, just to be thinking how we broaden how we think about resourcing this work, that obviously there are multiple forms of financial resources, but there's different ways to go about it. We see community foundations, community savings schemes. Yes, there's grants, groups like Radical Flexibility Fund, people that are exploring different ways, but they're often thinking about resourcing in terms of what is it that, again, builds relationships. And that can sound like a simplistic answer, but that leads to the second thing that we are seeing, at least, which is the merging of actors that take part in nonviolent collective action and social movements. There's a merging between those actors and traditional civil society sectors. And as we see the rise of authoritarianism around the world and the continued shrinking of civic space, including in the U.S., we have to broaden and deepen our allies who seek change. And if we want to have this reimagined system, we have to be more networked than authoritarians are. And that's where the relationship-based approach does scale up. And I saw the question in the chat there. The collective action can help bring actors together from across different sectors and be able to create much more unification. Even if it won't be able to handle every problem at once, but at the same time, we're thinking about how do we support those spaces, those coalitions, that ecosystem that supports social movements. How do we support those spaces where those relationships are deepened? Because that's what's going to help sustain those that are doing the work, those that are really seeking this positive change. That's what's going to help sustain them over the next several decades. And so I think for me, kind of the four main points I'm circulating in my head and that I'm already hearing on this call is this is a moment of profound system change, and the system we knew is never coming back. We cannot expect private philanthropy to fill the gap, as Nana was saying. And sure, private donors are collaborating and coordinating, but we're not going to fill that $40 billion gap. And if we want this reimagined system that shifts power to those with that lived experience that are most proximate to the problems that they're trying to solve, what are the ways that we can resource that over the long term and make it as flexible and risk tolerant as possible so that new system can emerge? And the way I'm thinking about this right now is thinking in multiple time horizons, right? Like, yes, we're talking about what happens 5 months from now. We have to think about what happens 5 decades from now. And authoritarians and far-right actors are networked. They fund over decades, and their financial supporters fund them over decades. They fund to win. And we have to do the same thing. We have to fund long-term with flexible, risk-tolerant support, and we need to follow the lead of those closest to the work. And if we focus on the relationships that creates and the partnerships that creates, then that future that we hope for is closer than we think. But there are obviously multiple seeming barriers in front of us, but the collaboration that I'm already seeing happen across different sectors, again, gives me hope.
That's great, Jesse. Thank you so much. And this really rich conversation already going on in the chat, ideas around sort of post-aid world, what it might look like, obviously post-USAID world, some real lovely examples of sort of what needs to be built in order to shift that system. So, David, I'm just going to pass to you to just glean from our wider group of participants, their experience and creative ideas in this space, because I think there's
Thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you so much, Nana and Jesse, for that super rich conversation. Jesse said a little bit earlier, kind of, obviously he cannot name all the shifts, they cannot name all the shifts. Now is your time, your possibility to name a couple of more shifts that you're observing, recent ongoing shifts in the resourcing space, but really also examples of where is this done differently already. So what we've seen in the other sessions is this is just also a great opportunity to sharing resources with each other. And that's what we would love to invite you to as well. Do that, please, in the chat. We want to kind of gather collective wisdom and data and resources. We'll take a couple of moments to do that. And we'll try to have an eye on the chat. It's very funny. Zoom actually asks me at the moment if I'm speaking Spanish. That's interesting. I don't speak Spanish, no. Super funny. I'm quite struck by this false dichotomy between the trust-based and the strategic philanthropy, where it seems that what's there described as strategic is so unstrategic in light of what you just said, Jesse, in terms of this, we need to work these long-term coalitions. That's what we need to invest into, and into the partnerships. And relationship often is such a soft word, but it's about the partnerships that we're building in order to for the long-term success. So please, again, share in the chat some examples of other recent ongoing shifts in the resourcing space that you think we need to be aware of. Other resources. Other examples. This took a little bit in the last session as well. People are writing things before they can post it. So I'll wait a bit more. I think there's more resources to share with each other than what's there so far. Jenny, I'm just going to look at you. Is there any question, any comment so far in the chat? Now you had a little bit of time to actually look at the chat. That springs
Well,
out.
one point that is written but hasn't been sort of, I don't think we've emphasized yet, is this sort of another area of risk, and actually Nana did touch on this, but like a risk that philanthropists or other power holders sort of move into the space that's been created, and that has a further set of sort of dynamics around it. So I guess it's worth just keeping that in mind. Already there's talk, I think, of Bloomberg stepping into some of the space on the climate change side of things, and maybe Gates stepping into some of the space in the USAID programs has created, and then I know that some governments are really sort of trying to flex and fill some of those spaces, which of course is like immediate, sort of logical, sensible, and altruistic thing to do. But I guess it brings with it a further set of sort of power dynamics that is worth keeping an eye on. So I just spotted that conversation bubbling up. I think another strand of what's in the chat is a sort of reflection between the roles of bilateral and private philanthropy connected to that. Yeah.
And there are more resources coming in the chat, which is wonderful. I also find it interesting, the example from Sudan here, the emergency response room, where, when I understand it correctly, basically the terms of collaboration are set from those actors working and collaborating locally, and then intermediaries, or however we want to call them, can buy in on those terms, if I understand that post correctly. So it's also about who sets the terms of the partnership and the terms of engagement, funding schemes.
And there's some really helpful, like really practical examples, like the one shared by Doris there of the Accountability Lab, actually doing a sort of matchmaking of different organizations and initiatives affected by the shifts, to explore partnerships, mergers, etc. So that's where the system, you can see the system sort of evolves, right, to adapt. And actually you might have different formations of civil society or of implementing organizations that result. Yeah, I guess another reflection just to add is that, coming back to this beating heart analogy, that actually if we can get some of the resourcing really right, as Nana was saying, really rooted in the contexts where change is happening, really coming out of communities or coming out of national initiatives and populations, national philanthropy, etc., then actually that can have a really transformative effect, because it pumps the resources in a really, really different way. And that in itself just really shapes the system in a very transformational way. So that's a sort of positive reflection to draw out as well.
Super, thank you so much. There is also one question about kind of concrete examples of risk sharing. And I just want to say tomorrow there's another session on accountability and risk sharing, a dedicated session where we'll speak more to the Brave Conversations prototype of the Ringo Lab, and share one concrete example, one experience. And I'm sure there are many, many others, obviously. That's what I'm hearing across the 3 sessions today. There's such a need to know more about each other, and work more closely together and network and build coalitions at this moment that we're in. Jenny, can I hand over back to you for a quick moment to tell us a little bit more about kind of what's going on in Ringo Phase 3 and how do we move forward as Ringo in this space?
Yeah, and for those of you who've been in other sessions, you will have heard some of these headlines before. But yeah, we are moving into phase 3 of Ringo. Phase 1 was our sort of social lab, as I described earlier. Phase 2 is where we really tried to think strategically about sort of how to use the insights that we had to influence into the system. And phase 3 is much more about really centering Global South activists and thinkers, and really sort of supporting regional conversations, supporting the Global South civil society community to be absolutely sort of centered in this conversation, and step back from some of the sort of global North spaces. So there's a really exciting agenda. Nancy, I feel like slightly a fraud to be speaking about this when you're on the call, because you're leading on this. But Nancy from WAXI is absolutely driving this forward. So it's a really exciting agenda. We've got lots of fantastic collaborators, such as Akapaka, who with Asia, who spoke on the earlier call today. We have a new hot off the press website, which we are all jumping around in excitement about, and hopefully someone will share a link in the chat there. There is resources, there is community, and that is the sort of go-to portal, if you like, for anything Ringo. So we're really, really excited about the next phase. We really hope that everyone who's been part of these conversations today and those that are happening tomorrow will continue to engage. We've always said in Ringo that we're about blowing oxygen into other initiatives and other areas of transformation and thinking in the sector, and not taking it away from those spaces. So we're all about sort of collaboration, connection, and boosting each other. And in these times, we absolutely have to be that, and to model that. So I think that's all. Sparkle or Nancy or anybody else, do shout out if there's anything that I was meant to touch on that I haven't done. But yeah, the Ringo team is excited about the next phase.
Thank you, Jenny. And this is not yet the full closure of the session. Obviously, we also have a 30-minute informal hangout. So for anyone who wants to deepen the conversation, this room will be open for another 30 minutes, just for any informal conversation that wants to happen. And if you want to deepen some of the issues and ideas that have been mentioned by the speakers, but also in the chat, please stay on for those 30 minutes. That's the first thing. The second thing is, we would love to test the weather, or not test the weather, but hear the weather. We, after all what you heard now around resourcing, and the moment that we are in. We'd love to hear from you specifically when you think about shifting power in relation to resource flows. Which weather symbol reflects the moment we are in now in February 2025 best? We've asked that question in the last session already. We want to ask this question again, but specifically on resource flows, because I think it can also differ when we look at governance and leadership and resource flows. So here you've got a whiteboard. You can just directly move on this whiteboard, pick one of those little checks and move it to the weather symbol that for you best reflects the weather that we're currently in. When it comes to resource flows, you can also enlarge the checks. That's also great. So just pick one, move it to the weather area. Oh, wow. Typhoon, tornado, this is coming up really strongly, and this is obviously also not surprising. It's thunderstorms, typhoons. You can also put it in the chat if you want to say a little bit more about why you choose that specific symbol. There are a lot of dark clouds. Drought is there as well. Drought, sorry. And there is also rainbow, and I love that. So there's a hope here as well. There's a crack in everything, and there's a crack even in the crisis. That's how the light comes in. Wonderful. Thank you so much. We another map is moving. Let's stop with this. Thank you so much. We want to hear one more time from Nana and from Jesse, from the conversation you had together, but also what you've seen emerging in the chat. What are your two key takeaways from this session? What are the two key things that you want everyone to walk away with from this session? Nana, do you want to start?
Yeah, my two key takeaways. The first one is that we have to think of resourcing and raising capital very differently from the way we've done in the past. It means that we need to learn new things. And some of us, we need to share more because some people know, others don't. So let's connect, let's share more. Let's, learn new ways of raising the capital that we need to do the work. And then we need a system that strengthens institutions to build their own resource bases. I think that is also very important. And we need to work towards that system and do what we can to invest in that. So those are the two things that for me are very important going forward.
Thank you, Nana. Jesse.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try to say better than that. I think that I agree with that so much. I think for me, just to add on to what Nana was saying, again, just this whole notion that, and I think just definitely seeing this in the chat too, that if we want to be able to fill the void, the vacuum that's been created by the current system dying, we really have to make sure we're, and I was just saying, the learning that we have, like between all of us, we have the knowledge that's needed to create the system that we've talked about reimagining. We can go from imagining it to realizing it, and I'm definitely feeling that on this call. And I think there's what's in my mind right now is as we think about how do we fund over a 5-decade window, thinking about, there are two terms that are in my head that I'm hearing through this. One is the notion of kind of sufficiency, meaning like, is the knowledge that we have between us sufficient enough to be able to accomplish what we want? And I think the answer is yes. And then there's also, the term resilience, and resiliency gets thrown around a lot. And then I obviously used to roll my eyes, but I recently heard someone talk about a different way of thinking about it that I'm really seeing start to emerge now. And that is that being resilient is not just the ability to bounce back. It's about the ability to push back and then to have each other's back. And that there's this collaborative component to that. And that it's when we get pushed down, that we don't just stand up by ourselves, but we're surrounded by an entire community, an entire globe of people that want to do things differently. And it's getting louder, and there will, in my hope is that there will be no choice but for current donors and new forms of resources that come in there's no choice but to follow those that are closest to the work and those that are from the communities that have the answers to their problems collectively, that we can do this together. So I think I got a little jumbled there, but I really do feel like there's this, I'm seeing the resilience of this community right now, despite all of the pain and hardship that's going on, that from this we are going to bounce back and push back and have each other's back as we go forward. And I'm finding personally a lot of inspiration and hope from what I'm seeing in the chat and from what I'm hearing people say, despite just the awfulness we find ourselves in this moment of monsters when the system is collapsing.
Thank you so much, Nana. Thank you so much, Jesse. We had titled this session Resource Flows, Addressing the Beating Heart of the System. And we might not have thought it at the beginning of the session, but when we looked at recent developments in the US, but also in other countries and with other governments, but it seems that the beating heart of the system, it's beating quite loudly and with hope. So thank you also for this kind of the clarity around that and leaving with hope. Thank you everyone for joining. We're super thrilled to have had you.